So last Friday, I, a 25-year-old female, had little time to kill before picking up my kids from school. And it was a gorgeous day, so I decided to spend some time cruising some back roads in my hometown, small and rural, listening to music. I passed this guy with his thumb out trying to catch a ride, and I almost picked this guy up. He looked to be in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, carrying a fishing pole and a backpack. Pretty innocent looking, I guess. But see, I'm a lone female and have been taught with hundreds of hitchhiker gone wrong stories that you just keep driving. So I kept driving. And as I'm driving, I'm having this internal dialogue of guilt about my decision not to pick this guy up. You know, if I was hitchhiking, I'd hope someone would pick me up. And, I mean, really, what's the worst that could happen? That, mixed with my new self-improvement goal of doing the things that scare me as often as possible, led me to the conclusion that, if when I looped back around and he was still walking, I would pick him up. Sure enough, about 10 minutes later, he was still there. I was feeling a little nervous pulling up over by him, but what was I gonna do? Peel off while he was trying to get in my vehicle? As soon as he gets in, I realize I have probably made a horrible mistake. 1, because he seemed like he was tweaking balls and smelled god awful. 2, because this guy was looking at me like I was a feast and he was starved. I didn't realize exactly how rattled I was with my decision until he asked me for a smoke, and my hands were shaking so bad I barely pulled one out of my pack without breaking it. Driving made it easier to hide my nerves. But I was internally freaking out and trying to decide how I would beat this guy's ass if he tried anything. His name is Wayne, and he lives about 5 minutes from where I picked him up. Meanwhile, he's telling me how he lost his license due to DUIs, and how he is living in this house with an old man. He tried to get him to come with him, but he didn't want to come, etc., etc. He's also trying to talk me into hanging out at said house with him, and come over to drink with him the next day. When I finally get him to his destination, it's just a little shack-like thing surrounded by all these junky cars and shit. He gets out and is trying still to get me to come inside with him. I tell him no and leave. I'm feeling really relieved and a little proud that I faced a fear of mine. Fast forward to Monday, my instructor says, "Holy shit, apparently someone got murdered down the so-and-so road. Do you know anyone down that way?" I say, "Wow. You know, that's really ironic. I took a hitchhiker down that road Friday. His name was Wayne, I think. Probably wasn't 15 minutes later when I see old Wayne's picture on Facebook, saying he was picked up for stabbing someone to death at the very house I dropped him off at Friday. Graphic information of how he stabbed him in the lungs and the victim bled out in that little shack. And the man he was living with doesn't even exist. I swear, I'll never pick up another hitchhiker in my life." Here's the guy's mugshot. Wayne is most definitely real. This happened about a year ago at my aunt's house. It was summertime and the weather had been exceptionally nice here of late. It was late at night, around 3 or 4 a.m. Usually during summer, I would stay up late watching YouTube or Netflix until sunrise. This particular night though, something happened that I could have never imagined. The house we were staying at only had one bathroom, and I had to go. It was currently occupied, and usually when that happens, I would go outside and piss in the woods. I decided to do that again. I go out there, and it was mid-60s out, very warm and clear skies. There is a main street straight across from the house. I finish up and begin walking back inside. Before I open the door, I hear a deep voice scream, "Hey!" I was a little startled due to the fact it was late at night and someone was outside screaming. I thought it might have been some neighbors arguing, but this seemed like it was closer than that. I go back to look and see if I can see something, and to my surprise, I see a dark figure standing in the middle of the road. Me, being a dumbass, screamed back at him sort of jokingly, "Yo." The figure didn't move. At this point, I was creeped out because whoever it was didn't respond, and even though it was dark out, the lights on the side of the street gave me a little bit of a view of the person's face. They were looking directly at me, emotionless. I decided to turn back and go inside, and just let it go. I began to watch YouTube again for another hour or so. After finishing up, it was around 5 in the morning, so I decided to call it a night and crash. The next day, I woke up in the evening. I go into the kitchen to get something to drink, and my mom is in a state of shock. I ask her, "What's wrong?" She said there was a home invasion last night across the street. I was so disturbed I couldn't speak. I eventually got my voice back and I asked her, did they catch the man involved? And she looked at me and said, "No." I used to work at this pizzeria that was only a few blocks from home, so I would always walk there and back to my house. Working there allowed me to meet many different kinds of people. There were people who were always kind, those who felt privileged, and those in between. However, there was this one person who was just a chill down my spine every time he came in kind of guy. He always had this wide smile the whole time that was obviously fake. He would always grab you by the arm and tell you how good the food was. It wasn't so bad because he didn't come in much, but part of me cringes every time he came in. One night, I was closing alone and he was the last person in the dining room. It was already past closing time, with the oven off and front side turned off, so no one would come in. I had been washing some dishes and headed up to see if he had left yet. He wasn't there, and I just assumed he had left since I didn't hear the bathroom door open, which made a loud noise when opened. So, I went to lock the doors and headed back to finish my dishes. I walked into the kitchen to find him standing in the middle of the kitchen holding out his dishes, asking me if I had been looking for them and if I wanted them. I walked up to take them, telling him he had startled me, and did a bit of a fake laugh, saying that I had locked the door but would go up and unlock it for him so he could leave. As I went to take a hold of the dishes, he grabbed my arm and looked me in the eyes with his big fake grin, telling me how grateful he was. His grip got slightly tighter as he told me that he appreciated the service I had provided and that he would be back. I was more than uncomfortable at the moment, and just sat his dishes aside to let him out. As I got down to unlock the bottom of the door, I felt him touch the top of my head. He looked down at me with that grin again, and told me that he was very much grateful for my service again, saying that I was always such a good worker there when he was around. He left and I locked the door, feeling beyond creeped out. That night I was walking home a bit later, and I had seen him in a car sitting out front of the store. I had taken the side exit, so I assumed he didn't see me as I walked home. He wasn't in the next day, but I saw him that night as I walked home. He had parked down the street from the side entrance and waved to me as I walked home. The next night, he was parked closer to my house and again waved with that creepy smile. I became beyond creeped out, and by the next night, he wasn't sitting in his car, but walking down the street, walking toward me. I ended up heading down a different road and ran home. The next 2 days, I just went different ways, but then on the third, he was there again. When I got out of work, and he passed me on my way home a few times, circling around to see which ways I was going. I told my cousin about it, who started giving me rides home and was on the lookout for the guy so he could report him if it kept happening. He came in a few days after I started getting the rides, and I found him standing in the kitchen doorway asking me where I had been since he hadn't seen me much, making it sound like he had been coming into order to my coworker who was with me. I just told him that I had been busy and tried to small talk till he left. When he did, I told my coworker about him and what had been happening, and she told me that if he came back, she would handle it. The strange thing about it, though, was that he never came back after that last chat we had. I didn't find him stalking the streets in or out of his car at night, and I didn't see him come into my workplace again. He just seemed to disappear altogether. I was able to walk home again, and I didn't feel so scared closing at night. Though there were times I was scared he would show up again, but he never did. So, from the age of 10 to 17, I lived in a house by a creek in a small town's downtown area. There were multiple parks by my house, 2 actual playgrounds, and one that was just a pond, creek, bridge, and path surrounded by grass, trees, and 2 elderly rehabilitation apartments. That path in the last park connected to the end of my street, and the bridge led to one of the playgrounds. The playground was also closed off for a remodel and was completely under construction. This is important. So, it was my 11th birthday. I didn't have a lot of friends and hadn't started middle school yet. It was June. I had a Hawaii-themed party in my yard. I invited my neighbor friend who was 2 years younger than me and a girl I knew in elementary school. The girl from elementary school showed up late, really late, by the way. We all wore our bathing suits and these cheap, colorful hula skirts from Party City. After playing in the sprinkler, we got permission to go to the creek and to go to the playground. So off we walked and played and just had fun. Once we got to the park though, we saw that it was closed off with construction tape and everything. A brick wall was also demolished and in a pile of rubble. The only thing left was one of the picnic tables and the gazebo. The weird thing was, the picnic table had a man sitting at it. He was a fatter man, older as well, probably between 30 and 40. He was wearing a white t-shirt and was eating McDonald's. We didn't think anything of it, but all 3 of us for sure saw him there and what he looked like, considering he was the only person in the park, so we decided to walk home. As we started walking back to the path, I noticed that the man had gotten up from the table and was watching us. But when he saw me look at him, he turned away. We kept walking. About a minute later, I looked back again and saw him about 10 feet away, also walking in our direction. When he saw me look at him, he kinda wandered away a couple feet. I alerted my friends and we started to get worried. So we jogged ahead a bit and we started to get worried. So we jogged ahead a bit and hid behind a couple trees to see if he would start walking the same way he had again. Sure enough, he did. He looked like he was looking for something, someone. We popped back out of the trees and started running. We were in the middle of the park with the path. We had a little while to go until we were at my house. I turned my head and I saw that he was running after us now, making it incredibly obvious that he was looking for us. We managed to get through the park, most of the way down my street, and started yelling for my mom and stepdad. By the time I looked back again, he was turning around and walking back to the path. We got to the house and inside and told them what happened. My stepdad and the neighbor's dad went out looking for the guy. I don't know what happened to him, but I do know that they found him. My story takes place back in the winter of 2009. I was 15 years old at the time. There were these woods by my house that my friends and I used to spend a lot of time in. These woods were massive. If you didn't know your way around, it would be easy to get lost in them. But it was at this point in my teen years when most of my friends lost interest in spending time in the woods. But I, on the other hand, always enjoyed being in nature. And as a result, I was spending a lot of time by myself in these woods. If I remember correctly, it was a very cold and dreary day in February. I was walking through the woods, listening to my MP3 player and smoking a cigarette. But then, out of nowhere, I noticed something moving around in the distance. At first, I thought maybe it was a deer or some sort of animal. But then, as I took a closer look, I noticed it wasn't an animal, it was a person. Now, one thing I should mention is, these woods were well known for being isolated and vastly empty, void of all humans. Aside from my friends and I, not once did I ever encounter another human being in the area. Instead of running away, turning around, or walking in the opposite direction, for whatever reason, I wasn't afraid and decided to approach this random mysterious person. I took off my headphones and shouted, "Hey, you!" What would happen next would shock me to the core. I came face to face with the creepiest old lady I've ever seen in my life. She had thick, wild, and frizzy gray hair. She was wearing what looked like a brown coat, along with a dark blue dress underneath. And along with that, she was wearing what looked like sandals. The weather outside was far too cold for sandals. I immediately got a bad vibe from her. I took a few steps back, nervously. For whatever reason, I said, "Oh, hey, I was just passing through." I honestly didn't know what else to say. This lady had the most frightening face I've ever seen. I'm not trying to sound mean, but she looked like some sort of demon. Her eyes were wide open and bulging out of her head. She looked like she was high on meth or something. She then began aggressively sprinting towards me and yelling in a somewhat creature-like manner. For an old lady, she certainly had some impressive running abilities. I began running as fast as I possibly could in the opposite direction. But surprisingly, she managed to keep up with me. And trust me, at age 15, I was a super fast runner. Then, for whatever reason, I randomly decided to climb up a tree in order to get away from her. I climbed up the tree as high as I possibly could. Down below, this creepy old lady attempted to climb up the tree, but failed to do so. I screamed at her, saying things like, "What do you want? Leave me alone!" I really didn't know what to do. Me and this old lady proceeded to stare at each other for about an hour. She had a terrifying look in her eyes, as if she was possessed. I'll never forget that look. She looked like she wanted to kill me. She kept making strange sounds, and I noticed that most of her teeth looked rotten, and many were missing. But then, out of nowhere, there was a noise in some nearby bushes, and she went aggressively running towards it. Her behavior was almost zombie-like, but this gave me the chance to run away. I climbed down out of the tree, ran as fast as I could out of the woods, and returned home. The next day, I told my friends about what had happened, but they didn't believe me. We went searching for the lady, but couldn't find her. What baffled me was, what was an old lady doing in the middle of the woods? Where did she come from? Why was she running after me? What happened to her? Till this day, there are still so many unanswered questions, but even till this very day, I can still see her face in my mind.